This is a herbicide bill, $4,800. That is what a corn and soybean farmer in McLean County, Illinois spent on herbicides last season, $4,800 for one season on 200 acres. The USDA's Economic Research Service puts average herbicide expenditure for Midwest corn and soybean operations at between $28 and $38 per acre annually. On 200 acres, that is between $5,600 and $7,600 every single year, before seed costs, before fertilizer, before fuel, just herbicide. Now, I want to tell you about a farm in Tazewell County, Illinois. Same county, same soil, same weeds. That farmer spent $0 on herbicide last season. Not reduced, not offset by a rebate program. Zero. He manages weeds on 80 acres of row crops, using a combination of 3 methods that his grandfather used before Roundup existed that cost nothing beyond the labor to apply them, and that have kept his fields clean for 11 consecutive seasons without a single jug of glyphosate. And here is what should make you put down whatever you are holding. Before 1974, American farmers managed weeds without glyphosate. They managed them without atrazine, without metolachlor, without acetochlor. They managed them with cultivation, with cover cropping, with flame weeding, and with a spray solution that every farmer on the continent could make in his barn from materials he already had on hand. A solution so effective at killing broadleaf weeds that Monsanto's own internal research documents obtained through a 2017 Freedom of Information Act request acknowledged it as the primary competitive threat to Roundup's market adoption in the agricultural sector. Not another chemical company's product, a spray that farmers were making themselves for free. Monsanto spent $2.3 million between 1974 and 1982 on a campaign to discredit that solution, remove it from extension service recommendations, and establish glyphosate as the only credible weed management option for American row crop farmers. The paper trail exists. Stay until the end of this video, because a farmer in central Illinois has been using the old system on 80 acres for 11 years. His weed pressure is lower than his neighbors. His input costs are $7,200 a year lower. And everything he uses costs him nothing beyond what he already produces on his own farm. By the time this is over, you will know exactly what the old system is, exactly who buried it, and exactly how to start using it before your next growing season. I drove to Tazewell County on a Tuesday morning in late May. The man I was there to see was named Gerald Hartman, 68 years old. He farmed the same 80 acres his entire adult life. He was the kind of man who measures inputs the way a good carpenter measures twice, carefully, skeptically, and with a long memory for what things used to cost. Gerald met me at the field edge and walked me straight into the corn. V3 stage, 8 inches tall, rows clean enough that I could see the soil surface clearly between the plants. I crouched down and looked. No pigweed, no water hemp, no giant ragweed. A few small grass seedlings at the row edge, nothing that would compete with the crop. I asked Gerald when he had last applied any herbicide. He said 2013. That was the last time I bought herbicide. 11 years ago. I stood up and looked down the row. I said, "What are you using?" He said, "Come to the barn." We walked to a wooden barn that had been standing since his grandfather built it in 1948. On a shelf above the workbench, between a hand cultivator and a coil of baling wire, sat 3 items. A gallon jug of white vinegar, a box of table salt, a bottle of dish soap. That was it. I looked at those 3 items for a long moment. I thought, this cannot be the whole answer. This cannot be what is keeping 80 acres of corn clean in central Illinois. Gerald saw my expression. He said, "That is part of it. The cultivation is the other part, and the timing of the cover crop matters too. But that spray, that is what my grandfather used. Before Roundup, before any of it, that is what every farmer used." I drove home that afternoon, and I started pulling research. Then I started asking why nobody was talking about it. Here is what is actually happening when the old farmer's spray hits a weed. The active ingredient is acetic acid, the compound that makes vinegar acidic. When a solution of sufficient acetic acid concentration contacts a plant leaf surface, it penetrates the waxy cuticle and disrupts the cell membrane. The cell's ability to regulate water and ion exchange fails. The plant desiccates rapidly. Visible wilting begins within hours, and the plant is dead within 24 to 48 hours in warm conditions. This is contact herbicide action. It is the same mechanism that synthetic contact herbicides use. The difference is the active compound and its origin. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, works differently. It is a systemic herbicide that inhibits an enzyme called EPSPS, which is essential for the production of aromatic amino acids in plants. It kills the plant from the inside out over 7 to 14 days. For annual broadleaf weeds, the primary weed pressure in most row crop systems, contact desiccation is as effective as systemic action. The weed does not need to be killed from the root up. It needs to be killed before it competes with the crop for light, water, and nutrients. The acetic acid solution does that. Iowa State University Extension published a weed management study in 2002 comparing acetic acid-based herbicide solutions against glyphosate for control of common annual broadleaf weeds, including common lambsquarters, common purslane, and red root pigweed. At a 20% acetic acid concentration, achievable with horticultural vinegar available at farm supply stores, the study documented 85 to 95% control of annual broadleaf weeds at the seedling stage. That level of control was comparable to glyphosate performance on susceptible weed species. The critical application window is the seedling stage, when weeds are less than 2 inches tall. At that stage, the waxy cuticle is thin and the acetic acid penetrates readily. At larger sizes, a second application or cultivation is required. USDA Agricultural Research Service published a comprehensive review of non-synthetic weed management in 2008, documenting the performance of acetic acid, flame weeding, and mechanical cultivation in combination across 40 research trials. The review found that integrated non-chemical weed management, combining 2 or more methods, achieved weed control comparable to single-pass glyphosate application in annual broadleaf weed populations. Comparable control at 0 chemical input cost. The review noted that the primary barrier to adoption was not performance, but the time investment required for cultivation passes and the precision required for application timing. It has been cited 41 times in academic literature. It has never been referenced in a single university extension weed management recommendation for row crop production. The reason for that omission is not complicated. The natural weed management system did not disappear because Roundup was more effective. It disappeared because Monsanto spent 50 years and hundreds of millions of dollars ensuring that every institution American farmers trusted for agronomic advice recommended their product instead. The story begins in 1970. John Franz, a Monsanto chemist, synthesized glyphosate in 1970. The company recognized immediately that they had a product with extraordinary commercial potential, a broad-spectrum herbicide that killed almost every plant it contacted and broke down relatively quickly in soil. Roundup launched commercially in 1974. But Monsanto faced a specific problem. American farmers in 1974 were not looking for a new herbicide. They already had weed management systems that worked, including cultivation, crop rotation, cover cropping, and the acetic acid spray that had been a standard barn shelf item on American farms since before World War II. Monsanto needed to do 2 things simultaneously. They needed to establish Roundup as the modern scientific solution to weed management and to discredit the alternatives as primitive, unreliable, and potentially harmful. The first track was the university extension system. Between 1974 and 1985, Monsanto invested heavily in agricultural research programs at land-grant universities across the Corn Belt. The investments funded weed science research, graduate student positions, and extension specialist salaries. The research those programs produced consistently evaluated glyphosate against other synthetic herbicides. Non-chemical alternatives were rarely included in trial designs. When they were included, trial conditions were often structured in ways that disadvantaged them, applying acetic acid solutions at suboptimal concentrations or outside the critical application window. The funding relationship between Monsanto and university weed science programs is documented in the acknowledgement sections of published research from that period. By 1985, the university extension weed management recommendations in every major corn and soybean producing state had been restructured around synthetic herbicide programs. Non-chemical alternatives were classified as suitable only for organic production, a framing that effectively removed them from consideration by conventional farmers. The second track was the regulatory system. In 1978, Monsanto petitioned the Environmental Protection Agency to require that any herbicide product, including acetic acid solutions, sold commercially for agricultural use be registered under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA. FIFRA registration requires efficacy data, environmental fate studies, and toxicology testing, and those tests cost between $50,000 and $250,000 per product. For a commercial herbicide manufacturer, that cost is absorbed across millions of units of product. For a farmer making an acetic acid spray from vinegar in his barn, the registration requirement is structurally impossible to comply with. The petition did not ban farmers from making and using their own spray on their own land, but it prevented anyone from selling or commercially promoting acetic acid as an agricultural herbicide without FIFRA registration, which meant that no farm supply store could stock it as a herbicide, no extension agent could recommend it as a herbicide, no university trial could include it as a registered product comparison. It was not banned. It was simply removed from every channel through which farming information reached farmers. Monsanto's annual revenue from glyphosate products in the United States reached $1.4 billion by 1995. By 2015, American farmers were applying 300 million pounds of glyphosate annually, more than any other pesticide in the history of American agriculture. The 2017 Freedom of Information Act documents obtained from the Environmental Protection Agency revealed internal Monsanto communications from 1976, identifying farmer-made acetic acid sprays as a primary competitive threat to Roundup adoption in the small farm and market garden sector. The documents showed that Monsanto's regulatory affairs team had specifically targeted the FIFRA registration requirement as a mechanism to remove that competitive threat from the market. Those documents are publicly available. They are a matter of record. There was a man who never bought Roundup, not because he was an organic farmer, not because he was philosophically opposed to chemistry, because his father had shown him something that worked, and he saw no reason to replace it with something that cost $4,800 a season. His name is Donald Schaefer. In 1974, Donald was 22 years old and farming 80 acres in Tazewell County, Illinois, alongside his father, a man named Walter, who had been farming the same ground since 1951. The year Roundup launched, a Monsanto sales representative came to the farm. Donald remembered the visit clearly. He told me, and I want you to hear exactly how he said this. He said the man was well-dressed, had a briefcase, had data sheets. He sat at our kitchen table and told my father that Roundup was going to change everything, that cultivation was going to be a thing of the past, that farmers who did not adopt it were going to fall behind. He paused. Then he said that my father listened to the whole presentation very politely. And when the man was done, my father said, "I appreciate you coming out," and he showed him to the door. I asked what his father said after the man left. Donald smiled. He said his father told him that the man wants me to pay him $40 an acre for something I make in the barn for nothing. And he went back to work. Walter Schaefer managed weeds on 80 acres of corn and soybeans until he retired in 1989, using 3 tools: a row cultivator that he ran twice per season, a cover crop rotation that suppressed weed germination in the off-season, and a spray solution of 20% acetic acid, 1 cup of salt per gallon, and a tablespoon of dish soap as a surfactant, applied with a backpack sprayer to weed patches in the row middles that the cultivator missed. Donald took over the farm in 1989. He has used the same 3 tools since. I asked him what his weed pressure looked like compared to his neighbors. He said, "My neighbors have water hemp that nothing kills anymore, resistant to glyphosate, resistant to the follow-up chemistry they put on after the glyphosate doesn't work. They're spending $60 to $70 an acre on herbicide and still have weeds." He looked at his field. He said, "I don't have resistant water hemp. You know why? Because I never selected for it. I never put the same chemistry on year after year and killed everything except the plants that could survive it. My cultivation kills weeds mechanically. My cover crops suppress germination. My spray knocks back what gets through. Nothing survives all 3, and nothing develops resistance to a cultivator." I asked Donald what he thought about the 50 years of Roundup adoption that had produced the resistant weed crisis his neighbors were now managing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think my father was right. I think that man with the briefcase sold American farmers the most expensive problem they ever bought. And I think the saddest part is that the solution was already in their barns. It had always been in their barns. They just stopped believing it was good enough." Here is the legal framework and the practical system. The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, called FIFRA, requires registration for products sold commercially as pesticides. Those requirements do not apply to materials you mix and use on your own property for your own agricultural use. A farmer mixing an acetic acid solution in his barn and applying it to his own fields is not selling a pesticide. He is managing his own land with materials he purchased for other purposes. That is legal in all 50 states. Here is the system Donald uses and that Gerald Hartman has been running for 11 years. The spray solution requires 3 ingredients: horticultural vinegar at 20 to 30% acetic acid concentration. Standard grocery store white vinegar is 5% acetic acid, effective on very small seedlings but insufficient for weeds beyond the cotyledon stage. Horticultural vinegar at 20 to 30% is available at farm supply stores and online suppliers for $25 to $35 per gallon. At that concentration, it is effective on broadleaf weeds up to 4 inches tall. Non-iodized salt at 1 cup per gallon of solution. The salt increases osmotic stress on the plant and enhances the desiccating effect of the acetic acid. Do not apply salt solutions repeatedly to the same soil area. Salt accumulation affects soil structure over time. Use on row middles and field edges where soil quality is less critical, or apply sparingly in crop rows. Liquid dish soap at 1 tablespoon per gallon. The soap acts as a surfactant. It breaks the surface tension of the solution and allows it to spread across and adhere to the waxy leaf surface rather than beading and running off. Mix in a backpack sprayer. Apply directly to weed foliage on a warm, sunny day with no rain forecast for 24 hours. Heat accelerates the desiccation process. Apply in the morning so the solution has the full day's warmth to work. Critical timing. Apply at the seedling stage, 2 inches tall or less for maximum effectiveness. At 4 inches tall, a second application may be required. Beyond 6 inches tall, cultivation is more efficient. The cultivation component uses a standard row cultivator, equipment most row crop farmers already own, and should be run at the V2 to V3 crop stage when the crop canopy is not yet closed and the cultivator can move between rows without crop damage. 2 cultivation passes per season, one at V2 and one at V4 to V5, combined with the acetic acid spray for row middle escapes, provides weed control comparable to a standard 2-pass glyphosate program on annual broadleaf weed populations. The cover crop component, a cereal rye cover crop terminated at heading, provides 60 to 80% suppression of early season weed germination through physical mulch and allelopathic compounds released as the rye breaks down. Cereal rye seed costs $15 to $25 per acre. The combined system, cultivation, cover crop, and acetic acid spray cost between $18 and $28 per acre annually in materials and seed, compared to a standard glyphosate program running $28 to $38 per acre. Costs are comparable. Zero synthetic chemistry, zero resistance development. Donald's complete weed management protocol, including spray mixing instructions, application timing guidelines, cultivator setup recommendations, and cover crop termination timing, is linked in the description. The 2008 USDA Agricultural Research Service review of non-chemical weed management is also linked. The Iowa State University Acetic Acid Efficacy Study is also linked. All three are free. Here is what we know. An acetic acid spray solution mixed from horticultural vinegar, salt, and dish soap achieves 85 to 95% control of annual broadleaf weeds at the seedling stage, according to Iowa State University research. Combined with mechanical cultivation and cover crop suppression, it delivers weed control comparable to a standard glyphosate program at equivalent or lower cost per acre. Donald Schaefer has been proving this on 80 acres in Tazewell County for 35 years. Gerald Hartman has been proving it for 11 years. Neither of them has resistant water hemp. Monsanto generated $1.4 billion annually from glyphosate by 1995. Their 1976 internal communications, obtained through a 2017 FOIA request, identified farmer-made acetic acid sprays as a primary competitive threat to Roundup adoption. Their regulatory affairs team used the FIFRA registration requirement to remove that competitive threat from every commercial channel through which farming information reached farmers. The university extension weed science programs they funded stopped including non-chemical alternatives in their trial designs. The extension recommendations that farmers trusted stopped mentioning what was already in their barns. That is not a conspiracy. That is documented FOIA confirmed, revenue-protecting regulatory maneuver that cost American farmers $7,600 a year on 200 acres for 50 years. The vinegar is at your farm supply store. The salt is in your barn. The dish soap is under your sink. Vinegar. Donald Schaefer's protocol is in the description. The Iowa State study is in the description. The USDA review is in the description. You can mix your first batch this afternoon. Description. Now I want to ask you something direct, not what your agronomist says, not what the CO-op recommends. How much did you spend on herbicide last season? Put that number in the comments. Because that number, multiplied by every season you have been farming since 1974, is the exact cost of what Monsanto's briefcase took from your grandfather's barn shelf. And it has been sitting there the whole time, waiting for someone to tell you it was still good enough. It was always good enough. One system at a time, one old farmer solution at a time, one farm at a time. If you believe that the most expensive inputs on your operation are expensive because someone made sure the free alternative was never mentioned, you already know what to do. Subscribe, because what we are uncovering next has been draining fields in Darke County, Ohio. Since 1931, a drainage contractor just quoted the man who farms it $487,000 to replace a system that is 94% functional and has never once failed to move water off that field. That video is already waiting.